My true story from Nevada. After my husband's funeral, my son demanded my house. I said nothing about the $7,300,000, 0 cents, until I moved into a penthouse he couldn't afford. The house smelled of lilies and old wood. Outside, the funeral crowd began thinning, their footsteps crunching down the gravel path of the garden. I remained inside, in the room where we had celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, Christmases, and once, a small miracle, Travis's recovery from pneumonia when he was 7. Now, he stood in that same room, taller, broader, crueler. You drained his life, spent 40 years taking from him, Travis snarled, his voice sharp, not from grief but greed. Now you think you're entitled to the house? This house, the one Dad built? I said nothing. My fingers ran along the carved edge of the dining table. My husband made this table himself. I remembered the way he cursed the sander, the way he grinned when he got the varnish right. Travis never saw that version of him. He was too busy chasing jobs in other cities, coming home only when it was convenient. Kelly's heels clicked sharply on the hardwood as she moved closer. He's probably turning in his grave, she spat. Knowing you're still here, still clinging to this outdated shrine of a house, this place reeks of the past. My hand tightened on the back of the chair. The photo of my husband still sat on the mantel, untouched. He had chosen that frame himself, the silver one with the twisted edge. I would not let them touch it. I've signed the transfer forms already, Travis said with a mocking nod. The house, the car, the joint accounts, everything. You should probably look into assisted living. I hear there's a place with bingo nights down by the freeway, Kelly laughed. Or buy a cemetery plot, prepaid discount. It was not the words that hurt, it was the rehearsed coldness. They had planned this. My husband's body wasn't even cold in the ground. I turned to them and smiled gently, like I had done when they were children throwing tantrums over candy. That smile made Kelly's eye twitch. I said nothing, not because I was weak, but because there was nothing to say to people who had already closed their ears. I walked to the fireplace and picked up the photograph, slipping it into my handbag with care. His smile in that picture held stories only I remembered. I took one last look at the house and walked out the front door. Outside, the sun was too bright for a funeral day. The world moved on. So did I, but they had no idea what I carried with me. Not just the photo, but the envelope. The golden envelope, still in the inside pocket of my coat, sealed with wax, my name written in his trembling hand. 3 nights ago, while Travis snored upstairs and Kelly raided the wine cabinet, I had found it in the top drawer of his study, right where he told me to look. That drawer still smelled of cedar and ink and peppermint gum. He had left it there for me, not the lawyer, not the children, not even Mia, our youngest, who had been gone for years. Inside that envelope was more than just money. There was a key, silver, engraved, slightly worn. There was a trust document dated 2004, $7.3 million in a separate fund under my maiden name. Another document, ownership of a penthouse in Nevada, in my name. No contest, no loopholes. And there was the letter. My fingers shook when I opened it. Eleanor, if they come for you, let them. Let them believe they've won. Let them strip the walls bare and boast of their conquest. Then go. Use what I've left you, not because you need revenge, but because you deserve peace. You stood beside me when I was nothing. You held me up when the world broke me down. You never asked for more than my hand to hold. Now, I give you a life that is yours alone. They will not understand. That is not your burden. With all I have left, see. That night, I did not sleep. I lay in our bed alone, hearing every creak in the hallway, every whisper of wind against the window pane. My husband's presence felt closer than ever. Travis and Kelly slept like they had already buried me. In the morning, I cooked breakfast. I scrambled eggs, poured orange juice, set the table. I even smiled when Kelly stumbled in, hung over, and barked at me for not making coffee strong enough. I watched her eat from the china set I had bought with grocery savings in 1976. She called them ugly old plates just last week. I washed the dishes, I folded laundry, I wiped the counters clean of their fingerprints. Then I went upstairs and packed. 3 dresses, 1 coat, a pair of shoes, my photo, the envelope, and the letter. I waited until they left for another estate meeting, rushing to see which parts of my life they could carve and label theirs. Then I made the call. "Is the car still available?" I asked. The man on the other end answered simply, "It has been waiting for you, Mrs. Caldwell." At exactly 3:00 p.m., a black limousine pulled into the driveway. The driver opened the door with quiet respect, his hat pressed to his chest. I stepped inside. The door closed behind me, and for the first time in days, I exhaled. As we pulled away, I looked back at the house, not to mourn it, but to mark the end. The porch light still flickered, like it always had. Travis had never fixed it. He never fixed anything. That house didn't belong to me anymore, not legally, not emotionally. But it didn't belong to him either, not really. They thought they had won, but grief, like wealth, hides in quiet places. And what they never learned, what my husband always knew, is that the quiet woman in the room sees everything, waits, remembers, and eventually moves. Without a word, without a fight, but with everything that matters. The night after the funeral, I did not sleep. I sat alone in the guest bedroom they gave me, bare walls, a twin bed that creaked under my weight, and a small lamp that flickered with every gust of wind. The air was thick with the scent of dust and disinfectant. They had not even bothered to clean it before placing me there. I waited until the house fell silent, until Travis's heavy footsteps faded upstairs, until Kelly's television buzz lulled her into oblivion. Then I reached for my coat. The envelope was still there, golden, untouched, a private world sealed in wax. I opened it with a letter opener shaped like a dove, something my husband had once bought me on a trip to San Diego. The wax cracked like brittle bone. Inside, the trust documents, a deed, a letter. I spread them across the bed, smoothing each page with trembling fingers. The trust. $7,300,000, 0 cents. Dated back to 2004, created after Travis's second DUI, when my husband had finally accepted what I already knew: our son would never be ready for real responsibility. The Penthouse, fully paid, purchased under my maiden name with a Nevada address, a high-rise, downtown Las Vegas. Maintenance fees prepaid until 2030, fully furnished. And the letter. "If our son turns away from you, as I fear he might, I want you to know I planned for this. I could not stop the rot in his heart, but I could protect you from it. You were always more than the silence they mistook for surrender. You were the backbone, the breath, the reason. Go, choose the life that sees you, not one that erases you. And Eleanor, do not wait for their apology. Walk away, see." I sat there in that cold room, holding a letter soaked in love and regret, and something shifted inside me, not anger, not even revenge. Clarity. At 3:17 IAWAM, I picked up the phone. "Is this Mr. Santos?" I asked. The voice on the other end was calm, precise. "Yes, ma'am. Your husband said you might call. I need the car today." He did not ask questions. "It will be outside by 9 a.m. I did not sleep after that. I folded my clothes with care. I packed exactly what I needed: 2 dresses, a coat, a pair of gloves, the letter, and the photo of my husband. I tucked the trust and deed into the lining of my handbag. At sunrise, I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the morning light creeping across the tiles. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. It never had been, not truly. Travis came downstairs, half awake. He grunted at me, no apology, no question. "Make sure you lock up when you go," he mumbled. "We're meeting the realtor this afternoon." Kelly followed him, curling her lip as she passed. "You're still here?" I smiled gently, not for long. They didn't hear me. They were already gone. At 8:59 a.m., the limousine pulled into the driveway. It was sleek, black, and understated, exactly how my husband would have arranged it. The driver stepped out, dressed in gray, his movements practiced but respectful. "Miss Caldwell," he said, opening the door. I didn't look back as I stepped outside. The wind was crisp. The garden my husband planted, his roses, his hydrangeas, still bloomed beneath the morning frost. I paused only once, beneath the arch he built for our 40th anniversary. My fingers touched the metal, cold, unyielding. Then I walked down the path, suitcase in hand. The door of the limousine closed behind me with a quiet finality. As we pulled away, I saw Travis in the upstairs window, jaw slack, Kelly behind him in her robe, mouth moving in protest. They had heard the engine. Too late. Too slow. The house grew smaller in the rearview mirror, and I felt no sadness, only relief, like I had been holding my breath for 40 years and could finally exhale. The driver glanced at me in the mirror. "May I take you straight to the property, or would you prefer to stop for coffee?" "Straight there," I said, "but drive slowly." He nodded. Las Vegas came into view around midday. The desert shimmered on either side of the road, the city rising like a mirage that refused to disappear. Neon and stone. Memory and reinvention. The penthouse was on the 33rd floor. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped into a world that had waited quietly for me. Marble floors, tall windows, a view that stretched to the mountains. The furniture was soft, modern, untouched. The kitchen gleamed. The air smelled like possibility. On the glass dining table was a bouquet of dried lavender, my favorite. A note sat beside it. For the woman who remembered everything, even when no one else did. I pressed a hand to my chest. For the first time in days, I let myself cry. Not for what I had lost, but for what I had kept. That afternoon, I walked barefoot across the balcony, my hair catching in the wind. Below, Las Vegas pulsed with life. Casinos, chapels, secrets and second chances. Inside, I called the bank. I called the lawyer. I called Mia, my youngest. She didn't answer, but I left a message. "Honey," I said, my voice steady, "I'm somewhere new, somewhere right. I hope you'll visit. I'd like to see your face again." Then I sat down at the piano my husband had installed just for me, though I hadn't touched keys in years. I played one note, then another. The music came back slowly, like memory, like forgiveness. By sunset, I was no longer the woman they tried to bury beside my husband. I was someone else, someone he believed in, someone who had finally remembered herself. The next morning, while the coffee still steamed in their mugs and the hangover from their own arrogance lingered, Travis and Kelly sat lazily in their kitchen, flipping through television channels. The house was quieter without me. They had already begun moving furniture, opening drawers that had been mine, boxing books they never read and heirlooms they never understood. Kelly was chewing toast when the news anchor's voice caught her attention. Breaking local development news. Nevada's most luxurious residential penthouse has just changed hands. The 33rd floor of the prestigious Asterion Tower, previously unclaimed in public records, now belongs to a surprising figure. Travis glanced up. The screen cut to footage of the building, sleek, shining, rising like a crown above the Las Vegas skyline. The anchor continued. "Our sources confirm the new owner is Eleanor Caldwell, widow of the late Charles Caldwell, founder of Caldwell Electrical Solutions." The trust fund behind the purchase, we're told, was active for nearly 2 decades, quietly growing under her name. The camera panned to a shot of me standing in the penthouse window, silhouetted by the desert sun. My hair was pinned back. I wore a navy silk blouse and a pearl necklace my husband gave me when Mia was born. I wasn't smiling. I was just present, fully present, not a shadow, not a burden, but a woman standing in her own space. Kelly choked on her toast. "That can't be real." Travis dropped the remote, the batteries spilling across the floor like marbles. "No," he stammered. "That's some mistake, that's photoshopped or something." But it wasn't. I was there, and I had never looked more like myself. They rewound the segment, watched it again, then again. The news anchor's voice now cut like salt. From a house quietly taken from her, to a view no one saw coming. Eleanor Caldwell's story is a reminder. Sometimes the softest voices hold the sharpest turns. Travis slammed his palm against the counter. "She made us look like thieves on national TV." Kelly's face darkened. "She made herself look like royalty." They wasted no time. Travis changed clothes like a man dressing for war. Kelly curled her hair. They drove in silence, their fury heavy enough to fog the windows. When they arrived at the Asterion Tower, the valet didn't acknowledge them. The concierge barely looked up. They stormed toward the private elevator, but 2 uniformed security guards stepped forward. "Sorry," one said, firm and polite. "This floor requires verified clearance." "I'm her son," Travis shouted. "I have every right to go up there." The guard didn't blink. "Your name is not on the residence access list." Kelly's tone turned syrupy. "Can you just tell her that her children are here? She'll want to see us." The guard glanced at his tablet, then looked back up. "No, ma'am. She specifically noted that visits from immediate relatives without invitation are to be declined." Travis lunged forward. "This is insane. That's our mother. That's my mother. You think some contract can stand between a son and his own damn mother?" He pointed at my mother. "You think some contract can stand between a son and his own damn mother?" At that moment, the elevator behind the guards opened. I stood inside. I wore black trousers, a lavender scarf, and a look they had never seen before. Calm, cold, not cruel, but unmistakably clear. Kelly gasped. Travis froze. I didn't step forward. I didn't invite them in. I simply met their eyes through the glass. Travis's voice cracked. "You really doing this?" Kelly hissed. "You embarrassed us. You lied to us." I tilted my head slightly. "I didn't lie. You didn't ask." Travis took a step forward. "We're family." I smiled, but it wasn't warm. Family doesn't scream at a widow during a funeral. The elevator door began to close. I watched their faces harden, then fracture, like porcelain left too long in the cold. Just before the doors shut completely, I spoke, softly. "You say I've been silent all these years, but silence isn't absence. It's the space where truth grows." And then they were gone. Back in the penthouse, I sat down by the window. The city glimmered beneath me. A security notification blinked on the tablet by my chair. Attempted unauthorized access denied. I pressed acknowledge. There was no satisfaction in hurting them, but there was peace in finally being untouchable. The next morning the doorbell rang. Not the main lobby, this one was private, on the 33rd floor, a direct ring to the penthouse entrance. Few people knew it existed. Fewer had the access code. I checked the screen. Travis. Alone. Drenched in sun and shame, he was kneeling, his suit was wrinkled, his eyes red. For the first time since my husband's death, his voice wasn't sharp, it was shattered. "Mama," he said through the intercom, "please." He hadn't called me that in years. "Please, let me make things right. I didn't know he left that for you. I thought... He broke off, wiping his face with the sleeve of his blazer. I didn't open the door, not out of cruelty, but because forgiveness isn't a door you open on command. He stayed there for an hour, then 2. Eventually he rose to his feet, defeated, and walked away without a word. I thought maybe that would be the end, but it wasn't. The next day, Kelly showed up, not with sorrow, not with apologies, with steel in her heels and poison in her smile. She didn't bother with the doorbell. She called my cell directly. How she got the number, I didn't know. "You think you've won, don't you?" she said, her voice flat and cold. "Do you think you can embarrass us on national television and sit up there in your little glass castle like some queen?" I didn't respond. She continued, "I don't care what he left you. I don't care what papers you have. People like you don't get to enjoy things like this for long." Then she hung up, a warning, or a promise. That night I found an envelope slipped under my door, unmarked, no return address. Inside was a printed contract, 1 page, short, direct. It stated, in legal but unmistakably menacing terms, that I was to forfeit public mention of any financial details connected to the Caldwell estate. I was to make no media appearances, no interviews, no future claims. In exchange, a payment would be made, small enough to insult, large enough to suggest power. And at the bottom a line, signed in good faith by Mike Garcia. I stared at the name. It meant nothing to me. Yet. The next morning the doorman called me. "There's a man in the lobby," he said. "Refuses to give a last name. Says he has an appointment." Describe him. Mid-40, leather jacket, scar under one eye. I told them not to let him up. He came anyway. 3 hours later, my security system glitched for the first time since I moved in. Not a full breach, just a pulse, a test. I knew what it was. He was inside the building. I locked every door, closed the blinds, called the lawyer, then the police. By the time they arrived, he was gone, but he left something behind. A lighter, silver, scratched with the initials MM, placed carefully on the grand piano beside my husband's photo. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from fear, from fury. They were no longer trying to take what was mine, they were trying to silence what I remembered. At 4 a.m., I wrote a letter, addressed to my husband. I placed it beside his photo. They begged. Then they threatened. But I won't flinch. I didn't survive widowhood, childbearing, betrayal, and burying every friend I ever loved, just to be bullied into silence by a woman with manicured malice and a man with a scar he earned hurting others. I will not leave this place. I will not vanish. And when they come again, I'll be ready. I folded the letter. I took the lighter, and I waited. The break-in was silent. No shattered glass, no blaring alarms, just the hum of systems temporarily paused, the soft click of a lock overridden, and the shadow moving through my home. He moved like a man who had done this before, quick, deliberate, confident. He passed the kitchen without a glance, in the hallway without a sound. His boots made no noise on the marble floor. He reached the piano room. That was where I waited. I sat in the corner, in the armchair by the fireplace. The lights were off. Only the moonlight filtered in through the tall windows. He did not see me at first. He walked straight to the piano, perhaps drawn by the silver lighter he left, perhaps expecting some proof that I was still here. But then he froze. I saw it. His shoulders stiffened, his head tilted slightly, then sharply down. The photograph. He reached for it with a gloved hand, trembling. It was an old picture, my husband and I at a summer fair, holding a child between us. A boy with scraped knees and a bandage over his brow. A boy I barely knew then, but had insisted stay the night after we found him crying near the edge of the freeway. He had been hit by a car, barely 12, bruised and scared, with no name and no one to call. That boy, this man. He fell to his knees. "Oh, God," he whispered, clutching the frame. "No, no, no, no." I rose slowly, silently. "I remember you," I said, voice steady, arms at my sides. He turned. His face was different now, older, harder, carved by life and regret, but the eyes were the same, wide, wounded. "I didn't know," he said, voice cracking. I stepped closer. "You left this on my piano," I said, holding up the lighter. "And this," I held out the contract, "was supposed to silence me?" He shook his head. "They didn't tell me who you were. I swear." I studied him. "But you still took the job." He looked down. "I needed the money. Kelly said it was just a scare job. No violence, no weapons, just pressure." "And what are you doing now?" I asked. He looked up again, eyes wet. "Trying to undo it." He stood slowly, hands up, not in surrender, but in shame. "I was 12, he said. "You found me by the road. I was bleeding. You wrapped my head with your scarf and gave me orange juice from your glove box. You waited 3 hours with me in the ER because no one came." I remembered the scarf, lavender wool. "You told the nurse I was your nephew," he said, voice cracking again. "So I wouldn't get dumped into a shelter." He stepped forward, holding out the photograph. "I never forgot your face." Silence stretched between us. Then I asked, "Why didn't you leave when you saw it was me?" He swallowed hard. "Because I'm tired of being the weapon in other people's hands." I nodded slowly. "What's your name now?" I asked. "Mike," he said. "Mike Garcia. Been going by that since I turned 18. "And what are you going to do now, Mike?" He looked me straight in the eyes. "I'm going to protect you." Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out a second envelope. "Here," he said, "everything they gave me. The contract, the cash deposit, and this," he handed me a small flash drive, an audio recording of the call. Kelly's voice, Travis in the background. They planned it together. I took the drive without flinching. "You'll testify?" I asked. He nodded. "Under oath, under God, however you need me." We stood in the quiet of the penthouse. Two people the world thought had nothing in common. But both of us had been used, both of us had been forgotten, and both of us had survived. That night, I wrote a new letter to my husband. "She sent a man to silence me, but he was not a weapon. He was a boy we once saved, and now he has returned, not as a threat, but as a shield. Your faith in me was never misplaced, and neither was mine in the world." Sometimes the lost return not to haunt, but to protect. I folded the letter. Mike stayed the night in the guest room. He didn't sleep, but he stood watch. And for the first time since you died, Charles, I slept without fear. I met with the lawyer on a Tuesday morning. Her name was Diane Patel. Sharp mind, steady eyes, and a voice that never needed to rise above a whisper. She read every page of the contract Mike handed over, scrolled through the audio files twice, then sat back in her chair and folded her hands. "We have them," she said simply. "I didn't ask for revenge. I asked for protection, for clarity, for the line between injustice and consequence to be drawn boldly and publicly." Diane filed the lawsuit within 48 hours. The charges were serious: conspiracy to intimidate an elderly individual, coercion, attempted fraud via falsified estate documents, and collusion to suppress lawful inheritance. There was a separate injunction to freeze all Caldwell asset transfers Travis had tried to claim. Mike signed his affidavit under oath. In his statement, he laid out the timeline: how Kelly had approached him through an intermediary, how the payment was made, how the contract was crafted in vague but damning language. He submitted the voice recording where Kelly said, "She won't talk if she knows someone's watching," and where Travis added, "Make it look like she's losing her mind." The moment that audio went public, everything changed. The media caught wind within hours. The first headline came from a small legal blog: "Nevada widow fights back against threats from her own family." Then a regional news site picked it up, then national outlets. By the end of the week, my name was on every newsstand from New York to San Diego. The New York Times ran a feature, "Inheritance and Intimidation: The Eleanor Caldwell Story." The Las Vegas Sun had a more blunt headline: "They took her house, she took back her life." But the one that stayed with me came from a social media post shared over 2 million times. This is not just a story about money. This is about the quiet power of a woman who refused to be erased. This is about a mother, not a wallet, not a doormat, not a relic, a mother. The comment sections were filled with outrage. "He should be disowned," one woman wrote. "I'd rather die alone than be treated like that by my own son. My grandma raised me," another wrote. Reading this made me cry in the middle of my shift. We have to do better. One post, from a trauma therapist in Minnesota, went viral. "Elder abuse is real, financial manipulation is real, but so is justice. This woman is proof." In the middle of this storm, Travis and Kelly vanished from the press. No statements, no apologies. Their lawyer issued a half-hearted denial, calling the situation a family misunderstanding exaggerated by the media. Diane responded with 3 words at the press conference: "We have evidence." The courthouse scheduled a preliminary hearing within 10 days. Mike flew in early, suited in black, hands steady. When asked why he came forward, he simply said, "Because she saved me when no one else did, and I'm not letting anyone hurt her again." I sat beside Diane at the front of the courtroom. Behind us were reporters, advocates for elder rights, college students, and strangers who had driven from other states just to witness it. Some held signs. One said, "My mom matters." Another, "Silence is not consent." The judge called the room to order. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I did not cry. I did not smile. I was not there to gloat. I was there to remind them of who I was, of what I had endured, of what silence could build if given time and truth. The courtroom was packed before sunrise. Outside, reporters lined the courthouse steps. Cameramen jockeyed for position. Microphones clutched like weapons of truth. Some whispered that the Eleanor Caldwell case would redefine elder protection law. Others just wanted to see the woman who had risen from ashes and silence to shake a nation's conscience. I walked through the main doors, flanked by Diane on one side and Mike on the other. He wore a navy suit, clean-shaven, hands trembling just slightly. Inside, the gallery buzzed. Journalists, advocates, law students with notebooks, even 2 elderly women from Arizona who'd driven 8 hours just to be in the room when justice remembered what a mother looks like. Travis and Kelly sat across the aisle, rigid, pale, surrounded by a team of expensive-looking lawyers who couldn't quite meet my eyes. The judge, a sharp woman in her 50s, entered swiftly and wasted no time. "Let's begin." The state laid out the facts first. The trust, the forged paperwork, the intimidation contract, the audio recording. Then Diane called me to the stand. I walked up slowly. No cane, no hesitation. I looked out at the crowd, then at Travis. He did not look back. I took a breath and spoke. They say I relied on them, that I was weak, that I was old and in the way. But I built the life they tried to steal. I held my husband's hand when we had nothing but dreams and bills. I cleaned houses, cooked meals, saved pennies in coffee cans, and when we finally had something, I gave it all to them. My voice didn't waver. But when he died, they saw me as leftover, like my love had expired with his breath. I turned slightly, meeting the judge's gaze. I didn't come here to punish my son. I came here because silence isn't always survival. Sometimes silence lets rot grow unchecked. This isn't about money. This is about dignity, about not letting the people you raise become the people who bury you before your time. I stepped down. The room was silent. Then Diane called Mike. He stood slowly, adjusting his tie. "State your name," the clerk said. "Michael Garcia." He hesitated. "Former collector, now private security, and your relationship to the plaintiff." His voice cracked. "She saved my life. 24 years ago, I was 12, bleeding on the side of the road. She gave me orange juice and her scarf, pretended I was family so I wouldn't end up in a shelter." He pulled a folded photo from his pocket, held it up. "That's me. That's her. That's the man who married her and raised me better in one day than my father did in a lifetime." Then he placed the photo down and took a breath. "I was hired by Kelly Caldwell, paid cash to deliver a contract to intimidate her. I didn't know who the target was until I got inside." His hands shook slightly now. "When I saw the photo on her piano, I couldn't do it. I couldn't be the weapon they paid for." He handed over the flash drive. "On here is the recording. Kelly gave the order. Travis approved it. I kept the proof because I knew someday someone would ask why I didn't follow through." He looked at me then. "She didn't just save me once. She saved me again by being someone worth protecting." Diane rested her hand gently on his shoulder as he stepped down. The judge reviewed everything quietly for nearly an hour. Then she spoke. "Eleanor Caldwell, the court recognizes the emotional, legal, and financial injustice committed against you. Your testimony was not only credible, it was courageous." She turned to Travis and Kelly. "You used legal manipulation and coercion to isolate and control your mother. You treated her not as a person, but as an inconvenience. That ends today." She banged the gavel once. "Travis Caldwell, your inheritance claims are revoked. Your name is removed from any account related to the Caldwell estate. Kelly Caldwell, you are hereby issued a restraining order. You are not to contact Eleanor Caldwell in any form." Then the final blow. "You are both ordered to pay damages totaling $2,500,000, 0 cents, to the Legacy and Justice Foundation established by the plaintiff. And this court strongly recommends psychological evaluation before any further estate appeals are entertained." The courtroom erupted. Some gasped, some applauded. Travis buried his face in his hands. Kelly stood frozen, as if her bones had turned to glass. I sat still, not triumphant, just free. Outside, the reporters swarmed, but I said only this: I didn't win today. I remembered who I was, and the law finally did too. The weeks after the trial passed not in silence, but in transformation. The penthouse that once felt like a safe house became a headquarters. My living room filled with blueprints, laptops, legal pads, and stories, hundreds of them. Stories mailed, emailed, whispered through tears, from women, from men, from the elderly across the country who saw my face on television and recognized a version of their own. "You made us visible," one letter read. "They thought we were furniture, but you stood up." That was when I knew it was time. Legacy and Justice was born. In the spring, a nonprofit, a mission, a mirror. Mike became its first director of security. Ironic, perhaps, but fitting. He now wore tailored suits and carried a clipboard instead of a threat. He greeted guests at the front desk and escorted survivors to their first meetings with lawyers and counselors. No longer a shadow in someone else's story, he had a name, a role, a purpose. We offered free legal assistance to elderly victims of financial abuse, temporary housing, psychological support, and perhaps most importantly, we listened. Each case started the same way, with silence, and ended with a voice. On the day we held our first press conference, the news crews returned, not for scandal this time, but for service. They asked me what I hoped the foundation would achieve. I said recognition, for the ones left behind, for the ones who fed generations with calloused hands and were repaid with neglect. This is not a charity. This is a reclamation. That afternoon, a letter arrived. The handwriting was familiar, cursive, delicate. I opened it slowly, breath caught between hope and caution. Mia, my daughter, gone for 6 years, not in hatred, but in hurt. She had married young, moved east, followed a career, distanced herself when the family fractures began to widen. We hadn't spoken since her father's first stroke. The letter was short. Mom, I saw you on TV. I didn't know what you had lived through. I thought your silence meant surrender. Now I see it was strategy. If you'll have me, I'd like to come home. Love, Mia. She arrived 3 days later. No camera crews, no announcement. Just a knock on the door and a breathless moment. I opened it. She stood there with her suitcase, and before she could speak, I pulled her into my arms. We cried. Not just for time lost, but for truth found. "Amma," she whispered, "you taught me something I didn't understand until now. Silence can be a strategy, but only if it ends with justice." She stayed. She volunteered at the foundation. She listened to every case like it was our own. Mike met her on the 3rd day. By the 5th, he asked her to lunch. By the end of the month, they were inseparable. "I didn't see that coming," I told her one night as we folded towels together in the guest suite. "Me neither," she smiled. But maybe we were all waiting for the right time to heal. The foundation grew fast. Media outlets invited me to speak. I appeared on talk shows, podcasts, town halls. On one show, the host asked, "What do you want people to remember about you?" I didn't hesitate. That old doesn't mean obsolete. That age doesn't make you invisible. That just because we don't raise our voices doesn't mean we don't have something to say. The audience stood. But it was never about applause. It was about turning the final chapter into a beginning. And in the evenings, when the world finally quieted, I stood on my balcony, tea in hand, the desert skyline flickering beneath the stars. From here, the city seemed smaller. But my voice, our voice, finally reached beyond it. I whispered to the wind, like a prayer, or a truth only the night could carry. Silence was my strategy, but justice was always going to be my final word. It was a quiet afternoon in Las Vegas. The sun hung low, painting the desert skyline in hues of amber and lavender. The wind had cooled, not the dry, blistering kind that scraped your skin in July, but a soft breeze that hinted at change, at endings that finally made peace with beginnings. On the rooftop of the Asterion Tower, among clusters of purple hydrangeas and white orchids, I stood still, staring down at the city that had witnessed my rebirth. In my hand was a wedding invitation, simple ivory paper, no gold trim, no pretense. Mike and Mia, 2:00 p.m., Saturday. My fingers traced the lettering as if it were carved in stone. This was more than a ceremony. It was a full circle. Guests began to arrive, dozens of them, but only the right ones. No long guest list, no velvet ropes. Just people who had seen me, heard me, stood by me when others turned away. Advocates, volunteers, survivors, old friends I thought I had outlived. Some brought flowers, some brought silence, all brought love. Mike stood at the altar in a crisp black suit. His hands fidgeted only once before he spotted me. He gave me a small, grateful nod. Mia appeared next, radiant in a dress that echoed the color of our lilacs back home. She walked not with nerves, but with knowing. She wasn't just walking toward a husband, she was walking back to herself, and in that moment, I stepped forward, before the vows, before the music. I took Mike's hand in mine, then reached for Mia's. I placed her hand atop his. A pause settled over the rooftop. The city fell silent, if only in my mind. "Don't repeat the mistakes your siblings made," I whispered. "Family is not a battlefield. It's not a contract. It's a memory you protect, not a trophy you fight for." Mike nodded, his eyes misted. "I know," he said. "I've lived outside family for too long to take it for granted now." Mia cried quietly. "Thank you, Mama," she whispered. "But bring more." They turned to the officiant, hand in hand. The ceremony was short, simple, sacred, but behind every vow was a deeper current, A man who had been lost, now found. A daughter who had misunderstood, now returned. And a mother, once discarded, now honored. The reception followed in the penthouse. No fireworks, no extravagance, just music, laughter, and the warmth of people who knew what second chances looked like. During the toast, Mike stood and raised his glass. "When I was 12, he began, voice shaking. I bled on the side of the road. No name, no family, no future. She found me. She gave me orange juice and her scarf. She told the ER nurse I was hers. Today, I get to say it out loud. I am." He looked at Mia. "And today, I marry the daughter of the woman who saved me, not because fate demanded it, but because grace made space for it." Tears flowed freely, and not just mine. Later that night, I stepped away from the music, away from the guests, and returned to my balcony. Below, Las Vegas pulsed with neon and noise, but up here it was still, sacred. Mia joined me quietly, wrapping her arms around me from behind. "If Dad could see this," she whispered, "he'd be so proud." I smiled through tears that did not come from sorrow. I didn't live for recognition. I said softly, "I lived so no one else would ever feel abandoned the way I once did." She nodded. "And you've done that, Mama. More than you know." A week later, we launched something new. The Second Chances Foundation, not just for headlines, not just for healing, but for people like Mike, for women like me, for men who had fallen through the cracks and needed not a savior, but a door. We provided housing for elderly parents abandoned by their children. We partnered with halfway homes to give reformed ex-cons a real chance. We paid for therapy, legal aid, and dignity. Mike and Mia took on executive roles. I remained on the board. My job wasn't to lead anymore. It was to ensure the work outlived me. We held our first open house on the anniversary of my husband's death. I wore his favorite scarf, lavender wool, and I read aloud from a note he once wrote. "If they turn on you, walk forward, not in rage, but in resolve, and build something they could never burn." That night, standing once again on the balcony, I raised my cup of chamomile tea to the stars. The city sparkled, the wind stirred the curtains, and I whispered to the dark, not in bitterness, not even in triumph, but in clarity. Silence can be misunderstood, but justice never needs to shout, it only needs time. Then I closed my eyes and breathed. Free. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to a voice that was once silent. This wasn't just a story about revenge, it was a story about dignity, about what happens when the quiet woman in the room remembers who she is and decides that silence is no longer survival, but strategy. Maybe you saw a part of yourself in Eleanor. Maybe you've been dismissed, betrayed, or told you were too old to matter. But here, you matter. At Grama True Stories, we tell the stories others forget, of women who loved deeply, endured quietly, and finally stood up not to scream, but to be heard. Because revenge has no expiration date, and wisdom doesn't shout, it remembers. If this story moved you, if it made you feel seen, please subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Hit the bell so you never miss a story where silence becomes strength and the forgotten finally speak. And if you have your own story or your grandmother's story, we're listening, always. Until next time, remember, some women are not meant to disappear. They're meant to be remembered forever.